You are listening to Processing Trauma Out Loud, conversations about trauma and healing from two women who are doing the work.
Hey everyone, it's Kandace and Sher with Processing Trauma Out Loud. Sher, we're back for another week on the topic of boundaries. After our last episode, you mentioned, what about doing an episode on what do we do when someone continually crosses our boundaries? Sure, what would you do if someone continually crossed your boundaries?
Well, I'll tell you what I would have done in the past, because I think that this is important. And I think that I would handle it much differently today. But in the past, I really struggled to find my voice. I felt deep down inside, I felt like I really wasn't worthy to ask for what I wanted. It was very hard for me even to identify my needs. So a lot of times I did have the feelings that you named last week of resentment and anger, because I didn't like how things were, but I hadn't really given voice to how I wanted things to be. And maybe I didn't even fully recognize. If someone would have said, well, what is it that you want? I maybe wouldn't have even been able to identify that. I just knew in my gut that I didn't like how things were. So I think in the past, I would not have been able to find my voice. And so I would have stayed kind of in the swirl of being discontent with where things were at and not knowing how to make it differently.
That almost sounds like a little bit of fawn response.
Yeah.
You would just go ahead and keep pleasing, even though you had this anger and bitterness coming up in you.
Yeah. And I want to just clarify that for our listeners, that the trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Not everybody includes fawn, but I really believe that it is a response to trauma. And fawning is just to do what we think the other person wants, because if we do what they want, then we will stay safe. And for me, I grew up in a home where I did a lot of fawning. I did a lot of being hyper vigilant to notice what I thought the other person needed so that I could make sure that things didn't get volatile or dangerous. So I became pretty equipped at fawning well, to the point where, like I said, I often couldn't have expressed clearly what my needs even were, but I could tell you what your needs were.
Right.
And how I could make you feel better. So yes, I would say yes, Kandace. I think that is where I would find myself. I would be in that mode of constantly looking for what the other person needed. Often try to provide that the best way that I could, but deep down inside, I would be left feeling lonely, empty, abandoned, desiring somebody to see me and care for me, and yet I wouldn't know how to really ask for that.
Well, as you've healed, and I'm going to say you're exiled there, that little girl who, she had to fawn to stay connected to get her basic needs met. I mean, the fear of being abandoned.
Yeah.
If you don't show up in this way. And the healing for you, it has come and is coming so beautifully in not fawning anymore.
Right.
And where you have had these relationships to where, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast several times, but it is, I remember when I was just getting to know you better, I had a messenger pop up with a video from you trembling about letting our group know something that you needed. And I felt so amazed. Wow, this is not easy for her.
Yeah.
I saw your little girl in there so much. And what I want to say is that act that you did early on in our group, I think broke open for us to feel more vulnerable collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Your healing is helping other people heal, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And as you're naming that, I'm thinking about the Enneagram, because I'm an Enneagram type 9. And so for one of my highest values is helping everybody else feel at peace, making sure there's no conflict and making sure that everything is smooth and everybody's happy. So it's not about me showing up and saying, guys, something went wrong and I'm feeling kind of hurt. And it took a tremendous amount of courage for me to do that. And I did it. And I think it was a first of me being able to do relationships differently. And I was in a place where I felt like there was safety. And we had already shared a couple of stories with each other. And so I took a big risk. And yeah. And so I think that learning how to use my voice, like this has been extremely significant. And I will say that I think that this is true for a lot of women. We have a very difficult time using our voice. And a lot of times we can carry expectations that the people around us will know what we're thinking and feeling. And we try to communicate that through ways that don't include actually using words. Learning to use my words and really have a voice when it came to asking for what I need, it's been huge.
Yeah. Sher, that's so good because as women, we weren't taught a lot of these things. They weren't modeled. And so we're learning this later in life, which still counts. We've come into our own grief of the work that we had to do in order to show up in ways that we could not only set our own boundaries, but to look at somebody else's boundaries and respect those. I know for me, and we mentioned this, I think, in the first and maybe second episode in this series, that a lot of this is connected to our attachment wounds and what that looks like. And so I am more fearful, avoidant, or disorganized, chaotic attachment, but I do lean towards more anxious attachment. When I look back on these relationships that I would feel anxious in, and I will say early on in my marriage, definitely, I had a lot of anxiety. I had a hard time giving my husband space or a friend space. There would be this anxiety of people with anxious attachment, because, usually feel like if I could just figure out what to do or not do, I could keep them attached to me. But then I could also, it could look like a boundary, but if I really started to feel unsafe, I had the ability to shut things down very quickly. So that's why it's called chaotic. And then the shame in that, like, okay, not only do I don't set boundaries when I need to. I'm very porous in my boundaries. People can just kind of come and go as they please in whatever way they please. I also hurt people by cutting them off. So the shame of how is this supposed to work? And what does this look like? Because I want to value and respect myself, and I want to value and respect others.
Yeah.
And it's honestly a lot of work around the attachment wounds.
Yeah. And because we haven't always seen it modeled in real life. And I think that makes it particularly hard. We haven't seen somebody set a boundary and enforce a boundary, or we haven't seen someone use their voice in a way that wasn't out of dysregulation. We may have seen a mom use her voice out of anger or anxiety or fear, but not using her voice out of courage and strength. And so I think being able to have that modeled is so important and so good that when we haven't had that, especially then, we really do need help in the whole boundary process, because how would it even be possible to do it without help? I mean, I don't think it would be.
Yeah. So this episode is about what happens when somebody repeatedly crosses your boundaries. How many times? To what degree? This would take a lot of work one-on-one, maybe with someone that can help you, because we will have blind spots, especially in our places of wounding. Being able to authentically come to the place where you say, I am no longer okay with this. What are my options now?
Yeah.
What are my options here to say the consequences are going to be more profound?
Yeah.
It's such a hard place.
Yeah.
And yet, if you stay in it, you're complicit.
Which is hard and true, right? And last week's episode, we talked about mutuality. And when we come to an awareness that there is not mutuality, where maybe there's a vast power differential, where there's a control differential, where we have asked for something and our voice is ignored or our desires are completely disrespected. What are the options? And the options at that point are making changes in the relationship. There has to be some kind of change made that enables us to stay in a place where we are offering respect to ourselves and even in a sense like honoring that person's choice to disrespect our boundary, therefore meaning they're not valuing the relationship. And that's hard when it comes to a place where we recognize that we have to make a significant change in the relationship. Some relationships cannot sustain, particularly when one person begins to heal and begins to recognize that they want something that is healthier and more mutual and more fulfilling. And the other person says, no, I don't want that and I won't do that. Sometimes there's a crossroads.
We've held and been witnesses of some of these very painful decisions that someone has had to bring closure to a relationship. And yet, I mean, this is where we say, you're not alone. And do you believe that you're worthy of mutuality?
And love and honor and respect. And yeah, we talked, Kandace, as we were preparing for this, and I used the words, and I think I want to just say it here to our listeners. If you need permission to get out of a relationship that is hurting you, where there is power or control being exerted over you, where there is disrespect of your voice and your boundaries, we can honor your decision to make changes in this relationship. And that might mean getting out completely, or it might mean something that's transitional or somewhere along the spectrum. But if you need permission to make a significant change in a hurtful relationship, I give you permission. It's not okay for someone to exercise power over you. That is against what you are willing to continue to endure in your life.
When I hear you say that, because we're all different and we can look at the Enneagram on some of those changes. You know, there will be some women that will say, I don't need anybody's permission. I'm going to do what I want, when I want, and how I want, right?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of women who feel so paralyzed and stuck and feel like they don't have options. Just that idea that they have permission can give them at least enough light and freedom to take their next step.
And that's all we're doing is we're saying, take a step, reach out to someone who can hear you and offer support, and for you to not feel like you are alone in this spot.
Good stuff, hard stuff, but we care. Like we care about not only our own healing, but the healing of the world.
Yeah, we do. And particularly, of course, the people who are listening, like we want to offer our good voice to you in any way that can support you in your healing journey. We really do.
Good to be with you around these 4 episodes on boundaries, Sher. And I hope we can hear from our listeners, whether it's just to offer feedback, to ask questions, or to say, can you connect me with a storywork coach?
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Kandace.
Love you, friend.
I love you too.
Thank you for listening to Processing Trauma Out Loud. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to suggested resources and social media. Like, subscribe, and follow to keep up with our weekly content. And if you don't mind, take a moment to rate and review us. Your feedback is extremely valuable and contributes to the success of this podcast. One last thing. If you have found this podcast helpful in any way, or if you have questions on how to take the next steps on your healing journey, please reach out to us via email at KandaceSher@gmail.com. That's KandaceSher@gmail.com. Our sound engineer is Jeremiah Jones of Auditory LLC. We welcome you to join us for more conversations soon. Take care.